I would love to introduce the panelists we have today. With us today, first off, we have Mara Driscoll. Mara Driscoll founded Boulder Arts Outdoors in July of 2020. In 2021, Boulder Arts Outdoors will carry its mission forth with a 6-week summer series to be presented at Boulder's Glen Huntington Band Shell. Beyond this, Mara has produced performances for dancers at the Met and Third Law Dance Theatre. She is also a professional dancer and choreographer who has performed with the Metropolitan Opera Ballet since 2016. Roderick Murray, who's joining us, he is a lighting designer and production manager for dance, opera, and music, and has worked internationally and in New York since 1988. He has also performed with Circus Amok in the streets of New York City from 1991-2000, and has been part of dozens of outdoor New York performance festivals. Will Knapp has been an independent production director for almost 40 years and has worked with the illustrious performing artists and organizations, including Merce Cunningham Dance Company and Jacob's Pillow Dance Festival. Monique Martin is an independent producer, curator, and programming director of multidisciplinary events across the 5 boroughs of New York City with 20 years of experience. She has most recently led the programming for Harlem Stage and previously Summer Stage and the River to River Festival. And finally, we have Jonah Levy, was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. He has been engaged heavily in the underground and legitimate arts and events world by working with venues such as the Silent Barn, Clock Tower Gallery, and House of Yes. In 2017, he co-founded Shadow Traffic, an art collective that provides a platform for immersive installations in the interstitial areas of the urban landscape, including the Lost Horizon Night Market. He has also been the associate producer of the Cell Theatre since October of 2019. And so, you know what? This whole salon really came to fruition because, like many of us, we have been creating to the best of our capabilities, but a lot of times it's really been kind of from these screens that we see in front of us. But as many so with the clearing out of with the rise of people being vaccinated and the warming up of temperatures and the access to the outdoors, although many of us are still incapable of working and unable to work indoors, we're reaching season and this when we can really begin to work out of doors. However, many people, and especially coming from the world of theater, are unfamiliar with working outdoors and are unfamiliar mostly with the logistics and all of the details of how to get work done. Because especially when we're talking about unconventional spaces, outdoor spaces, spaces that have had very few performances within them, or sometimes none of them, and also working with individuals and institutions that don't always have the infrastructure or the knowledge of what a performance requires. And so it felt like the most useful thing that we could do is pull together a group of amazing brains with years of experience to kind of provide us with almost a toolbox of how to get these things to happen. Because if you enter in without the knowledge, you can quite often end up, it's basically like helping you avoid the mistakes in a space where there isn't a lot of space to make mistakes. And so the idea being that even though we're going to be we are going to be focused mostly on producing work within the 5 boroughs. It is also a lot of the work and a lot of the advice and even the resources, even if they are 5 borough specific, other regions and other places will have their equivalent. So here's the idea of being these things exist in your area, not really depending on where you are. And so take these as a seed to again begin producing your own work. So actually, just to kind of begin to put in the context of what is required within New York City, I know, Roderick, you have a whole collection of resources that you'd love to walk us through.
Sure. Wow. Okay, great. I'll start right there. So just to go to the most primitive, just to begin. So many years ago, I performed with the Circus Amok as a juggler and a fire eater and knife thrower and things like this. So that was a long time ago. It was a different lifetime. And we packed up a truck at the beginning of a 4-week season, a U-Haul, and we drove it around to sites in New York City And every day we'd unload it, set up a show, and then the truck would become our dressing room. And then we'd load everything back, and then we'd move to the next site for the next day. And we had to have a parking place and everything else. So that's like a version of doing outdoor performance. And that's where I came from. And when this pandemic hit, and when I saw that the city was trying to promote the arts, which has been an amazing thing, and I think it's one thing that's really important about New York and hopefully other cities, is that the advocacy of people in the arts has been crucial to allowing for the possibilities that I'll show you guys right now in terms of getting permits to be able to perform outdoors. And so just be aware that the arts community, at least in New York, is extremely active right now with the mayor's office and the city councils and the state senators and everybody else. So it's really a powerful group, and it's something to keep in mind. Okay, I'm going to share my screen, and I'll just start here. This is the website for an organization that I started with Will Knapp, Robin Chattel, and Ethan Lurcher, and Monique Martin, and Janet Clancy. It's called Open Culture Works. And it was directly a response to the New York City creating a new permit for performing outdoors. It used to be that the only permits given outdoors were for block parties or for the film industry, and it used to cost $20,000 to close down a street. The new permit costs $20 to close down a street, and you can sell tickets to the shows. And this was something that the city created as a result of advocacy from the arts, people in the arts. Our website just gives like little information about us, and it also has a link to the map. This was a map, this was Will Knapp's idea, was to create a map. And I'm going to try to find where the little zoom in thing is here. This is a map of all the sites that go with this new permit, the open culture permit. And it's a resource that we share, this website and this map. We knew that the artists, the lead artists that we've been working with for our whole lives have no idea how to do outdoor performance. And so we started to try to create free resources for them to be able to use. So if you click on, say, this little green circle, it lets you know the address, and it lets you know that this is one of the open culture permitting places in New York. And you can apply for a permit here for $20 to do a performance. There's other features in it too, like we have the New York City Police precincts. If you want to do a performance in New York, and I'm sure this is true in other cities too, you're always going to need both a permit to be on the street, and you're going to need a permit to have amplified sound. And that's a really important and expensive thing. Usually in New York, it's $45. So everybody's faces have moved to the top. But at this point, now that I'm showing you this map, let me go back a little bit. There's 4 ways that you can do get permission to do a performance in New York. One is this open culture permit. Another is the permission of a landlord to do something on their street or their place or their backyard. Another is something called a plaza permit. So plazas are another kind of a place that you can do a performance, though there's limitations involved with that. And the last place is the parks. So you can get a parks permit. These things are governed by different agencies. Believe it or not, the Department of Transportation is in charge of the plazas, the Parks Department, obviously the parks, and the people who give out the film permits are in charge of the open culture ones. One of the resources that we're providing for people, and I have to get this to move away here, okay, so that I can see this better. This is something we created, which is called the New York Outdoor Performance Handbook. And as Monique was saying before we all got on, this kind of a handbook is something, and it's also what Anna was talking about, trying to create a toolbox for people. That's what this is really meant to be. It's meant to help people figure out what to think about as you get ready to do an outdoor performance. I'll just go down this a little bit. We have a whole bunch of links that get you to the permits, that get you to the guidelines. that get you to the various kinds of the parks permits, the plaza permits, all these sorts of things. It's a free resource. We created this for people to have for free in order to promote our community being able to do our job. And it goes through sort of step-by-step things to think about, like choose the right site. How do you choose a site? And this, I think other people will talk about this more, the producers and the artists in this group, this amazing group of people here. Goes through the steps about how to apply, and things to think about, like, do you have chairs? Do you need hand stamps? Do you need tape measures? Do you need a first aid kit? Things like this. And then also, super importantly, when you're outdoors, and I think other people will talk about this in more detail too, you're in a community, you're in the public. And so finding ways to be in communication with local businesses and local arts organizations, if possible, community centers, is really crucial to creating an environment that is citywide and it's really for everybody. We also include basic diagrams of how to set up COVID safe layouts for the streets. All of you people who are much better at Vectorworks, don't laugh at my drawings, please. I'm still working at Vectorworks 2014 and I'm happy, so don't bother me. And then like some basic city rules and things like this, and some best practices. So this is just a resource for people to have. It's really meant to be a sort of a gift to all of us as we try to do performance again. Then just to go really quickly into the city. So the city, this is where you would apply for your permits. It's the open culture guidelines page through the street activity permitting office. They have a whole lot of guidelines that go down. They tell you all this stuff. We say it also on our handbook, and we think ours is a little clearer. But one thing that they also have is they have this thing called the Cultural Events Portal. And I'm just going to click on that to sort of go through that quickly. They have in that you can find your way to events that are happening around the city. They also have their tips for successful performance, which is just what we have, and they have their own map. Will, in the creation of our map, discovered that New York City publishes extraordinary maps. They have a map of where every single water fountain is. They have a map about the amount of rat infestation in any given neighborhood at any given time. It's pretty cool. But this is the map that they created for this. And one thing that's good about their map is they include parks. And we may get to the point of including a parks in our maps too. But what they don't have is they didn't do it in Google. So you don't really know, like, you know how when you zoom in on Google, it's like, there's the bowling alley, there's the deli. You don't have that with this map. But what you do have is when you click on it, it tells you the name Oracle Playground. And then when you click on the little arrow, it tells you Oracle Playground, Parks Department. And then if you want to e-apply for a permit for this place, you click on more info and it gets you there. And then let me see, what else is this? So these are some of the things that the Street Activity Permitting Office gives permits for. At the end, all of these places. And don't forget that New York State, I'm sure like everybody else in New York City, has COVID guidelines. And so those are something that you have to follow. As part of any of these permits, you have to present a COVID plan. So Will, for instance, has taken courses on being a COVID manager that were given out by Local 52, this film people. So it's important to be considering like how you deal with COVID. And so that's another kind of a resource. And then MOME, the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment, came up with their guidelines for doing outdoor performance too, and I'm offering this freely. However, I will say that they absolutely plagiarized their handbook, because we created the handbook, and I was on the phone with the guy who gives the permits, and I told him about it, and he said, "That's so cool. Would you share it with me?" And I was like, "Sure." And so this follows the same exact format in terms of topics that ours does. They have a few more links in here, but it's pretty much the same thing. And they even plagiarized word for word a couple of paragraphs. So I'm not going to take them to court, because I don't really care, because this is meant to all be offered as a free resource. So there it is. But our group is a group of producers and production managers with just 10,000 years of experience, and we are here to help, and we receive emails and give advice for free on the phone and stuff. So I'm going to end my sharing. That was my like super fast survey of an extremely complicated thing that has involved many, many months of planning and preparation and getting to know people in the mayor's office that I never thought I'd get to know. I'm friends with community affairs officers in a couple of different police precincts to get sound permits. So it's just like, who knew this was the path I was going to go down? In the meantime, I just want to design lights for another opera, but this is pretty awesome right now because it's helping a lot of people. So I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you for that. You know what? That's brilliant. And like, yeah, if you can post those in the chat, I know that afterwards, after the salon is done, we're going to make those accessible as well, because this is knowledge that benefits everybody, and also like so much hard work and organization and brain power should be appreciated and utilized. And also what's great about the discussions we're having here is that every one of us is kind of a catalyst of a network that then can kind of like be spread out and shared, which is the best part. I have to be honest, is that I was so excited to get to that handbook that I didn't allow I forgot to kind of let everybody kind of, maybe it's perfect time as well to have everyone kind of go around and introduce themselves and actually what they're working on, because you've been working on this, Roderick, but also love to hear about in this time and also coming up in the summer what everyone here as well and our panelists is also working on. So can I pass this off to, actually, Will, can I pass this off to you?
Sure. How you doing? Yeah, I'm Will Knapp, and I'm a production manager, for the most part working in dance, and have worked on creating tons of work with tons of artists and toured a lot. And during the pandemic time, just was sort of like watching things happen. And Rick and Janet and I would get together for like these distant coffees and just talk about what we could possibly do. And when the rumbling started coming about that there might be a way for people to perform during the summertime, and we didn't really see what the art was going to be, with the vaccinations and opening up and things like that. We were like, let's see if we can find a way to help facilitate people, because we do all have experience doing shows in the outside and experience getting people shows up under weird conditions and and shifting goals and things like that. So that's what we started with Open Culture Works. I'm also working with a dance company called Kinetic Light, who is in rehearsal in San Francisco. Somehow I'm production managing from Park Slope. By the way, I used to have a table at Wingspace a long time ago, so I'm within walking distance of that space, and I don't even know how many people are there right now, but I know the organization well. So, and that's me.
Great. Can we pass it off to Monique?
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be here and to learn about Wingspace. I was not familiar with the organization prior to several weeks ago, so I'm really happy to learn about the work that you're doing. And I am now working with Open Culture Works. Thank you to Robin for inviting me. And now I have a gang of really smart people who are, I just want to say, volunteers. Before there was one dime on the table, committed to understanding and sharing knowledge with the broader community of how to present outdoors. And what brought me to this group, not only because of the wonderful invitation, but also the joy that I have experienced in outdoor presenting. There's something really magical about no barrier, no threshold to cross. You can come in from any location. There's not one entrance or one exit. And there tends to be a more relaxed vibe. So folks don't feel as though, we've seen many surveys where dance as an example, audiences oftentimes feel as though they won't understand it, or they have to have some prior knowledge to really experience it in depth. And there's something about dance outside that just brings people together. And we have seen over the last year, dance artists really exploding and sharing their work in parks, on rooftops, under bridges, in Times Square at 6 a.m. I saw a program with a flamenco dancer that was extraordinary. So we were able to see the city in a different way, and dancers were kind of creating a duet with the city, or a quartet, whatever amount of artists that were there. So what's exciting about outdoor presenting, although it is facilitated by a pandemic that we all are navigating as best we can, it does bring the opportunity for those that have not done outdoor presenting to think about it, and to think about audience building, because it also is an opportunity for that accidental audience member that is walking their dog, or just hanging out with their partner, or on their way to the store. It's like, what's happening in my neighborhood? What's happening on my street? And there's an engagement that happens that you don't really get in the same way, obviously, if you're in a venue where you have to have a ticket, or even if it's free, then you have to know about it. You have to either RSVP. So there's a lot of opportunity that I hope that those that have never presented outdoors, and folks that have presented outdoors, will embrace as something to look forward to, even as we open up indoor venues. The last thing I'll say is there are challenges with the indoor venues. I know a lot of my colleagues are waiting for the sector to open back up, and when we get back to the normal. And I think we all can somewhat agree, I hope we all can, that we are going forward. We're not going backwards. And the opportunity here is to think about some hybrid and mix of indoor, outdoor, virtual, because virtual also has exploded, particularly for the performing arts sector, where we are used to time-based experiences. This theater program, this dance program, this music, this concert happens at this time, at this moment, with these people. So if you miss it, then you miss it. And there's been some resistance around virtual, and where are the rights to that, and who owns the rights to that. So that is another area for us to think about, to expand. Maybe that'll be another topic, virtual and digital programming. And then with the outdoor, there's so many opportunities for outdoor in just the range. I know Roderick went through a lot of the information that, thank you for putting all those links in the chat that you can visit on your own. So if you're in a plaza, that's can be somewhat limited. Most of our plazas in New York City are small. It's not like some of the plazas in Europe. So there's a limited capacity. And how do you manage that? How do you make sure we all are so anxious for live performances that you don't get mobbed by people that are just really excited? When does amplification come in? When is there no amplification? And all of that information is on the Open Culture Works website, so you can find those guidelines. And there's, the last thing I wanted to say is really happy that I was able to I wrote a grant last year for dancers, for 10 dancers to create site-specific works in Harlem of their choosing, and to pair those dancers with a filmmaker. What we've seen is oftentimes artists are wanting to create work, but then they might not have the funds to document it and document it properly, not just on your iPhone or your friend that has an iPhone, but really to have a thought partner and a creative partner that is a filmmaker that can actually film it for presentation and not just for documentation. So that is launching next week, and the dancers have chosen some really beautiful locations. One is taking place in a community garden. So the buildings around the garden will be the audience. No one will be allowed in the garden except the artists, and we are filming it because it was a partnership with film and dance. So I share that to say that funders are also looking for more ways to reach audiences during this time. So don't be afraid to send in some blue sky dream, wild ideas that can support your dreams of presenting outdoors. And I'll leave it there.
That was amazing. You quite literally covered so many of the things that I even wanted to ask about. And I'm like, wow, great. Then we can like branch off from a million different directions from what everyone has something to share on that. But before we jump into that, I'd love to have everyone have a time to kind of speak up, talk about what they're up to. Jonah.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I have been working at the Cell Theatre primarily. We've had a lot of virtual offerings. One of them premieres tonight. I'm sad to miss it, but one interesting thing about the virtual sphere that Monique has mentioned all the possibilities and where we go from here is that it's available for viewing for the next 48 hours. So I can tune in anytime in the next 2 days. So a lot of virtual experiences. I did have an indoor offering that reached an audience of 1 or 2. It was an immersive experience based off the tarot, cards, the major arcana cards that sort of resembled a backwoods wanderings of sort of a New Orleans type realm that included a virtual tarot reading. So that was, a really great way to have a COVID safe experience utilizing the building that the Cell is happy to occupy, which is a townhouse in Chelsea. One really fantastic feature of this building is that we have a backyard. The back door opens as an accordion to create a more open space. And there are 2 8-foot windows in the front that open as well as doors. So we are able to, bring a lot of airflow in through the space, welcome folks directly into the backyard, which in the forgiveness permission realm of, producing events in this world has been tricky. I think when our founding artistic director was producing a bawdy version of Shakespeare in the rear, she made some enemies of some of our neighbors, but fortunately the neighbors, I think, are mostly into the chamber music that we're producing in the backyard right now. And that series is called Chamber Pickup Music because it's essentially 4 very talented, well-trained musicians who get together as a quartet for a Sunday afternoon and pick up some music and play through it and read through it and stop and talk about it and joke about it and talk about its history and have a cup of wine and, kind of invite the audience to remark or question or joke about, a very, very informal experience, the Chamber Pickup Music series. So really thrilled to have that. Couple of 1-person shows in the backyard, very low impact, very low/no tech. And I'd say the most joyful offerings we've had are a series of live drag performances that we've had on the sidewalk with the ability to open the windows out onto the sidewalk essentially and have a deep, broad sort of audience zone and a couple of well-placed garbage cans in the parking area, we've had a pretty good spacing out for audience members for these drag performances that have had a really fantastic range of performers, of kings and queens and things and quangs. And we just wrapped the last outdoor live show. We are looking ahead to some indoor stuff, but in the meantime, I'm really excited to talk more about outdoor stages with everybody here.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Obviously, I've been following, having been able to work with the Cell over this time in your virtual season. It's been an absolute, like the support network and the curation has been fantastic. Even the curation to my little shoddy little interactive websites. But thank you. I'm good. Before we jump further into conversation, I'd love to have Mara.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I feel that my sort of place in all of this and experience set is a little bit unconventional because I came to producing in the time of COVID. And I really love what Monique said as far as moving forward right now. And I feel that maybe one of the advantages to where I'm at is I only have the experience of moving forward and kind of meeting this moment as a producer and presenter. Before COVID hit, I was working primarily as a dancer. And of course, my life changed dramatically, as everyone's did. And I ended up in Boulder, Colorado, my hometown. I was living in New York City and saw this really vibrant summer festival culture kind of evaporate. And so I decided to take that on and start a pop-up drive-in performance festival. But I also really felt that the festival wasn't just about making performance happen. That was a big part of it. It was also about meeting this moment beyond just putting something up on stage. What do we need to engage with? How can we see access differently? How can outdoor work kind of naturally create new alliances and cross-pollinations among performers? So it was a really exciting, wild ride pulling this together. And the response from the community was very positive, and positive enough so that we're doing another run this year, not as a drive-in, but as just an outdoor 6-week festival at a band shell in downtown Boulder. So very excited about that. It's kind of the big project. But I think it's worth mentioning that another aspect of what I've been through in this past year is engaging with artists who were formerly just my colleagues as artists. And so many of us have been furloughed and kind of finding ourselves in situations that are so unlike what we're used to. I had been performing at the Metropolitan Opera. So this is a big place where you get a schedule and you show up and you go on stage and you get your paycheck at the end of it. And so all of a sudden, all of these artists are furloughed and unable to work. And so it's been really incredible kind of A, being someone who makes a show happen, and then B, being someone who is able to meet with other communities of artists and say, hey, you're able to do this, we're able to do this, outside of these big organizations that maybe we worked with in the past. And I think that Open Culture is such an incredible program in New York City because it and this tool book that Roderick gave kind of give all of these artists the ability to step forward and use their own voices and collaborate in ways maybe they didn't before. So it's a really cool, exciting time. One last thing is now I'm back in Boulder and I am working with Third Law Dance Theater here. And we're actually doing an immersive site-specific show in a tri-level parking garage. And I think this is just a really cool example of what's going on right now, because Third Law, like most dance companies, usually presented in a black box theater. And I mean, the shows were always wonderful, but in my personal opinion, seeing the artistic director engage with this space has brought out the most beautiful, inspiring things that maybe would not have occurred had she not been really pushed to engage with a new venue. So I think that's kind of a big thing in general too. When we're programming for outdoor spaces, instead of having this kind of standard, box that we're working with, we're pushed to really, envision performance in new ways, in new spaces. We have these almost ready-made worlds for us. So that's sort of a picture of where I'm at this time. I'll hand it back to Anna.
No, that's again, amazing. We can go off in so many threads from this point, but that's something that's kind of tied up with all of these points is like, it doesn't all come down to, but quite often it centers back into space. And if anything, COVID has really caused us to really question our relationship with space. And also in terms of, as we look into outdoor spaces, it's kind of like before with indoor theater, we know what a theater is and we know the capacities of a theater. But also when you basically open up to the outdoors, you go like, well, anything could become a space. But as we've seen from what Roderick has provided, maybe not everything can legally become a performance space. However, when you're looking at that, and those of us who have worked in outdoor theater know you don't just find a space, but you have to know how to approach that space and ask the people who oversee that space the best ways to get into that space and to use that space. I don't know if anybody has any examples or suggestions on A, like if you have an idea, like how do you find the space, and B, how do you get access to that space?
Anna, I'd love to hop in just because I think that the question Monique asked also kind of points to that. And I just mentioned the tri-level parking garage, and Monique asked, how did we is that we're working outside of theaters and the people who are traditionally presenting venues to us. This parking garage is run thinking of all of these other really cool things that they might be able to do in their garage.
Additionally to that, that answer of just ask is a really, really great answer. But I like the tone that Roderick said earlier, where this is the primitive kind of way of what's the very, very basics. A few steps up, that some people might want to consider are, if you're trying to track down someone to talk to, the hello@website.com is probably not a good email address to go to. Try to find an actual human to either email or call. And Monique, you also mentioned documentation. Documentation is absolutely key, because if you're trying to explain what you're doing, and a lot of artists are artists because they're better at doing what they're doing than explaining what they're doing, get photos for everything. Documentation is key. A lot of people think your event does not exist unless there are photos of it. And you know, you can say as much as you want about the needs and the wants of the thing, but if you attach a couple photos to, we're going to do something like this, you're more likely going to get somebody to understand what it is you're trying to use the space for. And then, of course, you know, low expectations, high possibilities. Keep your low expectations low of what you actually need from the space. Like, hey, is there a chance maybe there's a toilet there that some performers can possibly use? Like those low expectations. And then if they like you and you like them and there's a good vibe, that, you know, you'll get maybe a private room to change in, or, you know, a parking space. It would be amazing. Things like that.
Yeah, I just would love to jump in, Jonah. That's like so great that you brought that up. I mean, I think one of the things that Monique probably can speak to this better than us too, but it's just like, you know, when Will and Janet and I were going for our coffees, we're like, so where do you store the sound equipment? Like, how do you go to the bathroom? Where do you change your clothes? How do you get power for the sound system if you want one? And all of those things are all about community outreach. And part of that is also sort of riffing off of Anna's point about, you know, the space. It's also the event. The event changes so much by being outdoors, and the word event is kind of a crucial word for this outdoor stuff, because it's a performance, but it's also a gathering. It's also community. It's also all of this stuff. And an ex-student of mine from Hunter College is doing a salsa day on a block this Sunday, if it doesn't rain too much. And that's how she's using her permit to do like a big bunch of salsa classes and a bunch of other stuff. And that's like a crucial way that the culture that we've done indoors, that Monique was talking about, that you used to have to pay for, is going to be in everybody's face. And everybody's going to be reminded about how crucial it is to be next to a body, to see an actual human being like doing something, like how great that is. So anyway, I just wanted to jump in on this idea of
I'd like
event.
to follow. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I totally agree that, you know, we in theaters are so used to having such a greatly controlled environment, you know, especially designers. You can really, you know, you've got a negative space that you can put everything into, and in a outdoor environment, especially a New York space like a street, is the complete opposite of a negative space. It's completely filled space where you're trying to put something. So trying to like choose what, you know, what kind of artistic objective are you kind of, you know, achieve, you know, what are your strategies when every single thing can like go wrong, and anything that can go wrong will probably go wrong. You know, whatever you plan to do, it's got to be bomb proof. And maybe the way you make it bomb proof is you accept that it's all going to go sideways. So, you know, whether you're choosing to do, you know, noises off or Strindberg, you know, you've got artistic objectives there, but really these things come down to people being together, and that's what this like surprising experiences that we're getting, you know, and we're coming back to, you know, because a Zoom bomb is nothing to what can happen on New York Street, you know, it's going to happen.
Actually, just to jump in this conversation, having done a lot of outdoor performance myself, and a lot of times in places that definitely don't normally accommodate live performance, kind of both in New York and internationally. As a designer, I found that you can make a lot of things happen. First off, a lot of things that you would notice in a theater, you will definitely not notice outdoors. The level of detail, and as also you kind of like, you have to balance out the amazing, like you have to understand that quite often nothing can match the sheer beauty and the aesthetic of your surroundings when you're working outdoors. And don't try to fight that, work with it. But also I think in terms of dealing and working with the caretakers of the space, from a production standpoint as well as a design standpoint, is like, it's really important. Like you said, Jonah, you pointed out, with like, if you're going to email them, email to a person, an email to that person, an email to them, and do the research and know who oversees the space, who loves this space, who takes care of the space most of the time. And I find that when coming forward with proposals of what you can do in the space is to cater it and personalize it to those who oversee the space and respect the work and the care they put into it. To do your research and to come in over prepared and go like, okay, so this sounds crazy, and I know you have to deal with X, Y, and Z. So I've thought these things out already. Like really come in over prepared. It's like when you come in with a budget, don't just come in with a budget, come in with a contingency as well, which shows that you've actually thought about the realities of working in these space, because everyone gets really excited about the idea of a performance in their space, but then they don't realize what they're undertaking. And so you kind of have to be prepared to take their practice and their love of the space, or the logistics, or their dedication to the space into consideration.
Yeah, I guess this is making me think about, I'm thinking a lot about the parking garage right now because it's the project I'm currently working on. But one thing that came up early on is, okay, we have this parking garage, but if you go into a parking garage at night, especially, got fluorescent lights everywhere. So either it's a show that is in fluorescent lighting, or you've got to deal with that. And I think getting the right person on the phone is definitely very important, and it sometimes takes 3 or 4 or 5 tries, but that person usually exists, and we now have someone who's going to turn off all of the lights in this parking garage. And so I think it's an unusual experience for someone to be in a completely dark parking garage that then has theatrical lighting brought into it. But yeah, I think those are kind of the treasures that can come out of really leaning into the specifics of these spaces.
Hi,
Will
and I wanted to add in the identifying a key person at the site that may not be the person who's actually over the site. And I'm recalling my time with the Parks Department. So you'll have someone who issues the permit, you'll have someone who's might be the district-wide manager or the park manager, but it may be the person who actually opens up the comfort station, which is a fancier way of saying the bathrooms, who loves that park, who loves that space, who loves that plaza. They take pride in it. They are there 365 days a year. We're coming in for 1 day or 2 days or 1 week. So that person is your pathway to a yes, and that person will partner with you. So I think both Roderick and both Jonah talked about this, but that is really key, is finding an ally that might be an unusual person. It may even be a volunteer that really takes pride in the space and wants to animate it and activate it.
And just to follow up on that, it's not just that initial, even the site visit and those initial conversations. This is a relationship with that person, because basically communication is key. And to check in with them constantly and check in with everybody constantly, and the caretakers of the space over the whole process. So they know what's happening across the whole process. And if they have any concerns, they know there's someone there that they can speak to.
I would like to say that there is a danger of over communication for artists, producers who are not necessarily overly needy. We all know that there's a real danger to being overly needy, but to kind of overly communicate how much you care for the space. Actions speak louder than words. Kind of, if this person who has a whole bunch of keys and opens up the bathroom and is dealing with the public and dealing with lots of crazy shiny people over the course of the day, if they see you picking up those soda cans and sweeping up a little bit and just kind of putting all your stuff neatly in one tiny corner and just saying a few thank yous, a few how are you, a few, oh, the weather's being crazy right now, that can be way more powerful than constant communication.
Just wanted to add in, my ex-student who's doing the salsa block party. It's a block that has a Greek church, a funeral home, and two fundamentalist, charismatic churches on it. And so the community affairs officer at the police precinct said, okay, I'm going to give you a sound permit, but it's a Sunday. So you have to go and talk to all the churches and make sure it's okay that your event happens when it does, so it doesn't mess with their services. And so my student went and did it, and it was pretty awesome. So anyway, that's being aware of the people who you're going to be impacting. And that's also, I guess, that brings up the thing about doing something on somebody's block and playing the sound and somebody complaining about the sound that you're making and how you deal with the people who come in and the public who aren't happy that you're there, which is also part of it. And it's a real part too. So yeah. Can I just say one more thing, Mara? Because this was like, Will and I worked on this dance piece that Merce Cunningham choreographed back in 1964 called Winter Branch. And yes, Will.
I wasn't there at the time.
All right, we were, neither of us were there at the time, but Robert Rauschenberg did the lighting design for it. And Merce said to Robert Rauschenberg, this is what we heard from Bev Emmons, who's also an incredible lighting designer, who was the stage manager at the time, that the design was supposed to be what you see and you don't see at night on a country road when a car's headlights go by. And that was the design. And so there's like amazing possibilities out there, just thinking about what you're working on, Mara, just like car headlight. Anyway, okay, sorry, I'm done with that. Just the design person took over, sorry.
No, I love that. We are using the car headlights for our lighting. So yeah. Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, we want to jump into the artistic vision because a lot of the point of this is that we're creating spaces for us and others to create. So like, we're just basically doing all this groundwork so then we can jump on and really begin to spread out with the imagination. But actually talking about going back to this idea of a toolbox, specifically a toolbox for 2021, I want to like bring up the elephant in the room and switch it over in the time that we have. I think it's really important that we begin to just talk about like safety protocols around COVID and the techniques and tools for that, because that's just as important right now as getting the permits, getting the space and getting the permits, but also now it's doing it safely. So I don't know if anybody wants to jump in with like, we can go with everyone can get like a safety COVID officer, but also how they're approaching the situation and where you can get more information on it.
Oh yeah, Will. Will, you I think qualified as a COVID officer. I'm curious to hear your.
Well,
take,
I took classes. There are classes out there, and the
Yeah.
only classes heretofore have been in the film industry, and so that's what I went to go take what I could. And those classes are they're very inexpensive. They're $50, and they're a 3-hour online course, which is basically somebody reading a PowerPoint slide presentation and then questions at the end. So what does that mean? You know, basically it came down from Los Angeles putting forward for their film industry starting back up a bunch of very strict rules that they kind of like the city and the union came together to make these rules. And so that kind of thing, like how you handle a work site that's a film shoot, is really, really well sketched out. But it's all about how you handle a site that's very controlled. The people who are coming in, you've got a list, you know, everybody who's coming. You've got good communication with all those people, so you can send them what the rules are going to be like on site. When they get there, everybody gets checked with it, temperature thing. They do a survey, and then they come on the site, and the spacing and the food control and everything's very, very well controlled. Also, the person that has that training and is, deputized with this right basically to enforce these rules, becomes a very important player in the situation. So it's pretty cool, and you learn a lot of stuff, and a lot of it's very specific to how you can control a situation like that. But it has very little to do with a public where you don't control people. So it could apply to like the performers and the staff. So if you've got a good controlled situation, like if there's a backstage area and then you've got a front of house, you could do the same kind of thing. Like, this is who's coming, mail them out, a bunch of information about how everybody's got to behave. Everyone's got to show up with a test or a vaccination. There are a number of things like that that you can look at that are changing often. And you can control like the performing staff that way well. But again, how do you control like an audience that's in the outdoors? And I'm going to like talk first about these open streets. And I should like actually say, like, open streets is not a program of the city. It's literally just a permit. So there's no like money backing this up. There's no like grants or oversight. It's basically just, you can get a permit for $20, and with this permit you can charge money to do your show, but you've got to follow a bunch of rules. And one of those rules is that you've got to like file a COVID plan. But the COVID plan is very, very basic. It just says whatever the recent rules are, and you sign off on that and you say you're going to do it. So if you can now, when we started, it was 50 people were allowed to be at an event. Now it's 200. So part of the definition of what 50 people are is like, those are the people that are coming to your event. However, on an open street, you are not allowed to stop off traffic, of foot traffic of any sort. You're not allowed to create a barrier that like prevents people who are walking down the street from seeing your show, and you're not allowed to like stop them from stopping. Like, they can stop and watch your show because they can. So the question becomes like, who is at your event of the 50 to now 200 people, and who is outside your event, and who can you control, and what can you do to control that? And it gets really, really messy. And the first time around we did it, we kind of put up just taped off a big area that would hold 50 people. And at one end, we put a person with a table and a temperature checker, and it was an open event. It was just a press conference, so anybody could come. So people just started coming, and we counted the people that were coming in, and we tried to take temperatures, and it basically fell apart because people could just step inside our space through the tape. It was very, very uncontrolled, and it was one of the first things that happened. So it was very scary to us because we were not able to control it to that degree that we had one promise to do. And also, like, we wanted to protect people. Now, it was New York, so everybody was completely properly paranoid, and they naturally, like, took care of themselves. So it wasn't like a super spreader event at all. It was outdoors, it was windy, everybody was masked. It was really, when you looked at it, you're like, well, that was fine. It wasn't the plan at all, but that's what happened. And so going forward, we're like, well, so what do we do? And I think that if you're going to do that kind of a thing, you've got to encase your area and make it impossible for anybody to come in. You've got to literally stop people, like make a line and let them in and check every single one. So you've got that kind of control. And then you've got to put spacing, like you almost need, I think that you need like a front of house management, ushers, to bring people to pods. We had drawn circles on the ground. Nobody paid attention to the circles. They stood apart from each other, but it wasn't, so the more control you try and have, the more like frustrating it can be. So that element, the public, is where it gets really, really sketchy. I have to say, people are, I think people in our city, New York, really, really have behaved very well as far as this stuff is concerned. But it's really, really tricky. We heard about a cabaret that was like putting tables out in the street, keeping the tables very, very separated. You have to pay to get inside the seating area, and then everyone was separated at the table. Apparently that worked really well. But I don't know. So the same company that does the education, it's a private company that put together the education for the film industry, has now put together an education presentation for live events. And I'm going to put the link in. I'm going to take it. The first one is on Tuesday. I have no idea what it's going to be like. I don't know that it's actually going to really get into outdoor uncontrolled situations. But that's the problem that I see, is like, how do you control, and how much control can you really get before you lose control, you know? And also the whole arc of vaccination really throws everything up in the air, like what's really right when, you know, and it's a weird year, and we still don't know we still don't know. We're here figuring it out with each other. So that's what I got. I'll put that link in the
Yeah, on that note, precisely, you know, we still don't know, and what we know has changed vastly. I mean, you know, raise your hand if you wiped down your groceries when you brought them inside, and then 10 months later found out that there's a 1 in 10,000 chance of getting COVID from touching something. And I produced an indoor immersive event that a reviewer came to and numbered and italicized every unnecessarily high touch point inside of the experience. So I've been on the butt end of that type of critique that was ill-advised, but it was what we knew at the time. And you know, just today, the Times published a piece that echoed something The Atlantic published last week, that echoed something that Slate published recently about, you know, how necessary is it to enforce outdoor mask mandates. The Times in this piece today had a 2 out of 3 rule that they're proposing, where if you're outdoors and you are socially distanced, then you should not be required to wear a mask. If you are outdoors but you are not socially distanced, then you should be required to wear a mask. If you're not outdoors and you are socially distanced, then you should wear a mask. This 2 out of 3 notion. And there are some really interesting studies about, you know, the rarity of socially distanced people outdoors and the extremely low, you know, contagious rate, and the fact that if you are speaking to somebody, that ups the chance of conveying the virus. So, you know, there are some really interesting common sense notions that are maybe picking up steam. You know, there's one interesting aspect. An epidemiologist asked a number of mask-resistant men. She explained to them, okay, so it's now becoming aware to us that if you wear a mask indoors, it's much more effective than wearing it outdoors. The men started to wear masks indoors because the common sense that was in the back of their, you know, brain was told to them by a scientific, a leader in the scientific field, that, you know what, this outdoor mask thing, you were right. It actually is not that big of a deal. Would you wear it indoors because indoors is a bigger deal? The men said yes. So I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff that we're still learning about every single day. And, you know, I mean, that doesn't mean that I'm going to feel comfortable walking down the street not wearing a mask. It's an evolving situation. So to feel safe as producers is very important. To produce the right amount of COVID theater, and I'm just going to say it, a lot of it is theater. We have a sneeze guard at the Cell that's about this tall, and the ceilings are about 20 feet tall. And we put the little sneeze guard up because it makes people feel safe. And we have hand sanitizer out now because it makes people feel safe. So the COVID theater is extremely important, but it's also important as a producer, as an intelligent person, as a leader, to know how, you know, what your stance is, how you feel about it, what the science is telling you, and continue to evolve that position as you're learning more information.
I think that, yes, COVID is obviously the huge elephant in the room. And these things are going to keep changing and keep being obstacles. And of course, we always have a certain amount of control and then a certain number of things that are not in control. So I think given all of that, it's really important to, as much as possible ahead of time, manage the expectations of both your audience and your performers and crew. And of course, it's harder with your audience because these are people you're meeting the day of the show. And, you know, of course, problems still come up, but I've had some good success with, like, you know, the free Eventbrite platform, and including a whole list of, you know, protocols that people have to say yes to before they actually buy the ticket, or their expectations of, this is the line you will need to stand in when you get to the event. This is where you're going to have to be. If all of that is really kind of built into even buying a ticket, I know it's a lot more difficult for non-ticketed events or events where people are going to be buying tickets at the door more. But I just think that that's a tactic to really A, make people feel safe because they feel like they know what they're getting into, and then B, just help control things before you're actually on site at the performance.
Which goes to this question of staffing your show when you're outdoors. You know, when you go to a theater, like I've toured a lot. So you go to a theater, you meet the front of house person. Guess what? There's a certain number of ushers. They figured out how many they need to ush every one of their shows. There's a crew. They know how many people they need. When you're going outdoors, it's another one of those considerations you have to have. And in this era where we're trying to pay everybody for their work, it's very hard to imagine, you know, just on a city block, for instance, just getting people to funnel down to one entrance point could require 4 or 5 people, plus the person to ask the COVID questions, plus the person to take them to their chalk circle, plus, so it's a whole part of, as Jonah says, the COVID theater, but it's also, you know, right now, if you do get a permit, you're supposed to be following these rules. So, you know, it's another aspect of outdoor performance is your staff. So.
Rick, I wonder if we want to also talk about amplification versus no amplification, and stage versus no stage, and what the rules are around that. Because those rules were designed to mitigate large crowds. So if you have a stage, you cannot have amplification. If you don't have a stage, you can have amplification. And the reason behind that is if you're on an elevated platform and you have a microphone, then people can see you and hear you from a larger distance. So if you're 5 blocks away, you may join the party. But if you're on a stage with no amplification and you're 5 blocks away, you might be a little bit curious, but you're not going to rush over. So all of that information is also in the toolkit and on the website, but I just wanted to bring that up as well.
Yeah, Monique, and this is the crazy thing that we've all been learning about, is like these weird ass rules, including another part of that is you can present a film, but you can't have amplification with a film, which is just nuts. So like, it's another one of those things. But there is another like permutation of this. This is how in the weeds you can get. If your stage is on wheels and it can move, then somehow you can have amplification because it's not staying in one place. And so I think Bad Bunny was on the back of a flatbed truck and drove all through Upper Manhattan, just doing something, surrounded by the police, I have to say, to do his little performance, but somehow that passed COVID protocols because he wasn't standing still.
Oh, go ahead.
I would just love to bring up the forgiveness permission back and forth. I think it's pretty clever to have a good balance to get the basic permissions required that show that you got this piece of paper, you got that piece of paper, you got this email, you got that go ahead. And if you have a stage and are using amplification, what's the likelihood that a city official is going to come and say, we're going to pull the plug on this while there are, 50 attendees enjoying a performance? My guess is pretty low. And yeah, I don't want to get in trouble with, all of our beloved civic leaders. But in my experience of doing unpermissioned, somewhat transgressive events around the city, it's very rare that that person comes along and says you shouldn't be doing this. The person that comes along and says you shouldn't be doing this is the person who belongs to the community, who doesn't like you overstepping their boundaries, and that's the person that I will respect before, I respect the DOB guy with the clipboard.
That's great. And also, I don't know, actually, this whole microphone, like amplified sound, non-amplified sound, that's a new one to me. That's just thinking about universally, but is that just for New York, or do you think and where can one find that information? And I also am just thinking about where one can find that, if folks are listening in from outside of New York, where they might be able to find that. And just like knowing, and also taking into note, Jonah, exactly what you just said about forgiveness and permission.
And just don't get me wrong, apologize to no end if that guy with the clipboard comes along. I'm sorry, oh my God, I had no idea, of course. But still, forgiveness, please.
So in one of the links I sent, it has the current government, the New York State government COVID guidelines. And within those, there's also, it's listed what the current guidelines are for performances and small events and things like that. And I'm sure every state has their own. It depends, if the state government sets the COVID rules, or if it's a local government that sets the rules, and they probably have this spelled out somewhere. But yeah, this is a crazy rule that's been around since we went to phase 4 back in October.
Yeah, it had something to do. It came down from the governor, the mayor's office, because the permits that we're talking about are issued by the people that Rick was mentioning, but sound permits specifically come from the cops, because it comes from they know their local area. So you have to go to the cops no matter where your permit comes from to get your sound permit. So from somewhere else, the edict to all the police everywhere is just no sound permits for stages and screens. And that's sort of cut across any other permit. So that's how things can get really interleaved and a little bit tricky. But that's what we've tried to put together in that book, because that was the big process of going through all this stuff and figuring it all out.
So as evident, oh, go ahead, Mara.
Well, I mean, this might segue a little bit into something else, but I think that something I know some colleagues of mine are dealing with is trying to present work that is, maybe previously staged for an indoor theater as a part of the open culture program, or trying to envision a show, and they really want to have both a stage and amplified sound, and feeling this frustration with that, because it's like, oh, here we finally have this opportunity to do our work, but here's this rule and we can't, do what we've envisioned. And I really love the mention of Roderick's student who's doing this salsa event, because I feel like it speaks to that with these limitations, there's a lot of structure that's kind of dictated by them. And so even though it might be possible to kind of throw the rules out the door and just hope that you don't get caught, which, Jonah, is totally possible and hopefully probable. I think that even really envisioning, okay, what does this space actually offer? And maybe it's something really cool and different and outside of, what you would have done in a theater.
Which segues into, if you do have a stage, how do you get it to the location of your performance? How do you get it home? How do you store it? You know, all that, like, it just immediately goes to that logistical thing. But I will say, the other thing is the word on the street from the people we know in the mayor's office is that by the end of the month, that rule hopefully will disappear about the no stages and sound system. But so we're cautiously hoping and that it will change sooner than later. But yeah, it's a crazy rule for now.
Well, and just one other thing about that, I think, you know, the sort of stage transportation thing opens up the, you know, whole conversation about cost of all of this. And we're coming out of this year where artists and arts organizations have just been killed. And so there are totally ways to do things that are low cost. And maybe it is, for example, envisioning a really cool site specific happening that doesn't need a stage. And you know, now there aren't really funding structures per se behind open culture. So I think it's probably important for people to imagine outside of things that cost a lot of money.
My only thing about, you know, designing for a show without a stage is we had a drag show that involved a performer getting down on her knees and buzzing her head with clippers, and everybody wanted to crowd together and see what she was doing there on the floor. And I just have to say, please do not perform without a stage on the floor. It is a dangerous thing in the era of COVID theater.
So we've hit just about the 90-minute mark, and normally this time with salons, we will kind of say we'll graciously thank everyone for being here, and actually now we really much open the floor up. I've mentioned in the chat, opening up to questions, to clearly, as you've seen by now, these brilliant minds with tons of experience. For those who have gotten what they felt like they wanted to at the moment, you can feel free to head off or stay around and either post in your questions in the chat or raise your hand, and either myself or El or Edward, we can come through and unmute you, and you can turn on your video and ask in person.
I saw that there was a question from Vicky about insurance. And just to address that briefly, for the open culture permit, they actually have created something to support broke artists called the insurance waiver. And so if you apply for that permit, you can ask for an insurance waiver if your expected expenses will be, your expected income will be less than 1/4 of your expenses. So basically, there's no way that anybody's going to make money on these shows. That's going to be more than what it costs to put them up for the most part. So yes, you can apply for a waiver along with everything else when you go for the open culture permit. For the other ones, for the plazas, the parks, you need to carry a $1 million general liability insurance, and you need to put New York City as a co-insured, and if you're in a business improvement district, you have to put them as a co-insured. Anyway, it's a long thing, but happy to help anybody who wants to know.
Do we have any questions? Logistical questions?
Rain, sure.
The weather, that was a great one. Yes, the weather. Let's talk about the weather.
Yeah, I've been keeping my eye. The apps that I trust very, very much are Weather Underground for desktop, and the $4 for dark sky are extremely worth it, which is definitely available on iPhone, maybe also on Android. The weather changes all the time. I check the 7-day forecast. I check the 10-day forecast every single day. If I see rain if it's Monday and I see rain on a Saturday, I know that on Wednesday it could change, but to talk about it immediately. And know that, if it says rain on a day, that does not mean all day. It means it may start at 5, peak at 9, end at, noon. And to know percentage chance of rain, to know light rain could mean no rain. Heavy rain means definitely rain. To look at, try to be a meteorologist in the sense of when you're looking at a radar map, see the direction that the clouds are going. And if it looks like it's kind of going up and over the city, but your app is still telling you rain, then it might not rain. But nonetheless, there are $100 pop-up tents that are cheap, and you need to weigh them down with sandbags. You need to zip tie them to something. They can be very valuable. They can break immediately. And I think that's most of what I have to say about rain.
I think, with the weather, if you have the luxury of having rain dates scheduled that you can communicate to your performers and crew and audience, that's awesome. If you can't, I think it's kind of the same thing as a lot of things about these outdoor events. I think it's sort of imagining, okay, what's the worst that can happen? And weather is one of those things, and then fully having a plan and communicating that plan to everybody involved, including the audience, beforehand. And if you have contracts, that's having, something in the contract that talks about weather so that people really know what they're getting into. And you don't have expectations up in the air on the day of.
Also, just jumping in about weather, if we're talking about, think about who your audience is and their relationship with the local weather. I found, because quite often we have a rain check being like, okay, great, if it rains, we'll cancel. But I did an opera once in Cornwall in England, and unbeknownst to me, it has, like, in the summertime, despite being beautiful weather, it can have some very tempestuous weather. And when that came in to happen during our tech, I thought we were going to have to cancel until got informed that everyone here just puts on a raincoat, and we never cancel unless it's actually dangerous. So unbeknownst to me, my puppets weren't waterproof, so I had to make a whole bunch of puppet ponchos last minute. But that's one thing, is like recognize that, like, everywhere you are, everyone has a different relationship with the weather. And you probably might have to put on even if you're not expecting to. And also, if you're a designer or anything like that, really think about the durability and the resistance and the washability of your designs.
I'll add last on weather. I'm kind of like Jonah. I know far more about Doppler than I should. And looking at those red spots on the map as well. And we always, both with River to River and Summer Stage, it's rain or shine. We don't do a rain date because it's too many logistics to inform your audience. And also the artists, generally you have to hold the artist. So that means if they're in town, you have to hold them for 2 days or 3 days. If they're out of town, that's more hotels. And it never rains 2 days in a row. I don't know why, but it generally does not rain 2 days in a row. And like Jonah said, it may have a deluge up until your curtain, may rain all through sound check, and then have a beautiful time for the performance. And yes, your audience's relationship to the weather is also a factor. And what we learned at Summer Stage is gospel audiences will not come out in the rain.
That's great. Sanaz, I think you have a question right there.
Hi, yes, hi. I am directing Sweeney Todd outdoors this summer, up in Ithaca, and I mostly want to know how I can best support my designers as we go into. We're starting with our first big meeting on Saturday, and I just, I just want to know how I can best support them this summer. I'm not the producer. I can't do anything in terms of that, but just like, within the tech process or within just the rehearsal process, which is, 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks long. Like what you wished or want or seek from your directors, if you're working with a director, like early or late in the process, that like what I can do to make it better.
I would say a few things. Site visits, not only, whenever convenient, but during the times that you would rehearse or during the times that you would have the performance. A certain location at Friday at 9 p.m. is very different from that location at Tuesday at 3 p.m. Know where your closest restrooms are, nice place to get a coffee, nice place to grab a bite to eat, kind of making your performers comfortable in the sense that you know the area and that, you have information for them to feel more comfortable in the area. In terms of the production, load in, load out, are you going to what's parking like? Are you going to need ramps? That might be much more of a producer thing that I'm saying, but just kind of thinking about where your bumps are, like where your bumps and humps are, and how to smooth those out so it's just a little more seamless in this crazy time.
I would just second scheduling rehearsals at showtime as often as possible so that people are really seeing it for what it is and the way the audience is going to see it, and being super, super encouraging and flexible with the local staff, production staff, if there is one, in terms of accommodating late hours, early hours, different kinds of hours to help make sure that things get done. It's very hard to focus lights in the afternoon. So, I mean, the European schedules usually go till 5 in the morning. So, whatever it is, I don't know if you can do that in Ithaca.
Jane just brought up something really great in the chat, is actually thinking about how folks are getting fed. I don't know whether you're out in the woods or not or anything like that. I've definitely been stranded more or less without food in like a hotel with no restaurants nearby, and no one thought about how you feed the people. And also, this is something that I wanted to bring up with the COVID safety as well, is how do you feed people, taking consideration that they're not going to be easily accessed to just run down to the shop, but also how do you do it in a way that's actually like thinking about like singles. I mean, we don't want to have to, ecologically, this is disaster time, but thinking consciously of a food that nourishes people for a long time in various circumstances, and also B, taking into consideration it needs to probably be single serving, others individually packaged, etc. So when you're feeding your crew, giving them good food, but also food that is safe, and so not everyone's gathered around together.
Yeah, the film thing is to do brown bags to put together as much as possible. A contained brown bag meal of some sort, and then there's no tables to sit around. People who just go find a place, So it's kind of sad. All the craft services people are missing out on their shoots, but that's exactly it. Trying to find a way to like create prepackaged things that are, takeaways.
Artists remember the catering if they don't remember anything else. Good catering goes a long way. I would also suggest getting ponchos, and that's something that you might likely get branded from a local vendor or sponsor. But it's something that not everyone has. If you don't come from a rainy climate, you might not have your own poncho.
I think I would just add that if you're not someone who has the budget for catering or to provide certain things, just again, being really sure to communicate to people in advance, like, hey, you're going to be out in the sun all day and you're going to get a sunburn. So bring sunscreen, bring like tons of water, just really kind of equipping people who may not think about things in advance as much, kind of bringing those things up to them.
And bug stuff, mosquito repellent. Got to bring that too.
Thank you. And I can definitely advocate on behalf of all of them to the producers rigorously. So thanks.
Do we have any other questions going up? Anybody else got any questions? Does anybody, actually, I always love to kind of wrap things up in this way of, with our panelists. Is there anything tonight that you'd like to say that you haven't had the chance to say yet?
I just look forward to getting back in the flow of production, the energy, the excitement, the camaraderie, the getting shit done, and the live energy of it all. And I very much hope to see any one of our awesome panelists or moderators at one of these live productions coming up soon.
You're here.
I think, oh, yes, here. I just would add that I think, kind of the refrain for a lot of people in performance this year has been, oh, all of these things are not possible. There are so many limitations we can't do. And I mean, my own personal story has been finding all these things that I didn't realize I could do up until the pandemic. And so I just think that even though the restrictions are really frustrating, the cool thing about really leaning into outdoor performances is I think, we are just discovering all of these things that we can do and that we can keep doing even when indoor environments open up again.
I'd like to respond to Courtney's question about she'd like to learn more about community gardens. And I started, I'm a born again biker. I started biking during COVID in 2020. And one of the places I go to is my discovered garden in my neighborhood where you can drop off your compost. So I'm also now a composter. And getting to know the volunteers that manage that garden, I said, wow, I had already written the grant, but I didn't have all of the locations. And I also wanted the artists to select the locations, but I wanted to have a bank of locations for them to think about for artists who have never performed outdoors. Like, oh, you can consider this or you can consider that. So I talked to the folks that run the garden about doing a performance there. And one of the volunteers is actually a Chilean choreographer. She was like, I'm a choreographer and I've always wanted to do something in this garden. And so that's how that happened. And I think community gardens are overlooked spaces. And this particular garden, the way they set up the beds, it's like a mandala. And you can't really see it unless you're from above. And that's when I got the ideas that the audience can be the folks in the building. And then we would also film from above. So look out, go to your community gardens. I'm sure on NYC Grow, which also is tied to the, not the farmer's market, but the CSA markets. They have all the information there on the community gardens.
Thank you, Monique. If I could just have one follow-up. The reason why I was asking is because we're not necessarily, we're trying to plan to take what is normally a performance in our space into a low tech artistic experience rather than performance for kids in their outdoor spaces that are currently hopefully on their own site. And we're still struggling to figure out how we could potentially do that in public spaces without and dealing with the insurance is very challenging for us. So that's why I was asking about the community gardens and what that potentially could look like for kids being in the outer ring or not in the garden itself, and being able to interact with them safely. So is there a insurance what's the insurance situation there?
We didn't have to deal with the insurance, and we've just selected the artist and the location, so we might get to that point. I have found that community gardens they kind of self-regulate. They're outside of a plaza or a park or open street. And I don't know if Roderick or Will, you have any thoughts on community gardens in terms of any restrictions or challenges?
No, I think you're right, Monique. I mean, these community gardens were built out of the days when I was a kid in the 70s, and the city was a disaster, and people just took over spaces. And so they've always had this sort of, rebellious spirit about them. And they are self-regulating. The question of insurance is one for yourself, one of protecting yourself. It's a decision you have to make on your own. Anybody coming to an event and you've invited them there, there's some kind of responsibility that you have towards them as your audience or as your performers. And so nobody used to have insurance way back in the day, but now people tend to have insurance just to be careful and to be safe. It's not that expensive necessarily, but I don't think the community gardens they're gonna say whatever they're gonna say, but the insurance is outside of the garden thing.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I have to say thank you all so much for being here tonight. Thank you so much to the panelists, to Roderick, to Will, to Jonah, to Monique, to Mara, for just providing some of your knowledge. Obviously, it's very evident everyone has a vast array of knowledge, and to just give a bit and to start these conversations, and also to start a number of seeds in the space of the audience so they can go and distribute this information to everybody that they know and they work with. I also wanted to thank members of Wingspace for helping us put this on. I want to thank Edward, thank EL, thank the Wingspace Salon community. And we're going to be putting links, and we have more salons coming up. And so just have a look on our website, and you can begin to follow other discussions, exciting discussions we have coming up. We have more of the idea of toolbox, returning to other spaces, as well as kind of pressing matters in terms of design and in terms of performance and in terms of working in equitable theater. So I'm going to say that, again, reminder that our panelists are paid out of the pocket of Wingspace, out of the members of Wingspace. So if you'd like to support our salons, you can always send a donation to us via PayPal, which will be and a link provided on the side. And just please write salons in your subject line. And you can also join our mailing list. And there's a form at the bottom of every page in our website. And you just go there, and so actually this salon ended up happening because we had people who wanted to talk about this and want to have Roger who wanted to share the amazing resources that they put so much time and so much energy into not only collecting it, but also tracking down all the people who hold it. So I just want to give a little round of applause for, again, tying back to the beginning of this whole discussion with that just download that absolute download, which are going to be sharing. And
It's the work of a group. It's not me. It's the work of a group.
yeah, you and the team, but also to those who are listening and everything, to know that if you have a really great idea for Salon or want to share some resources or collect it and spread that out, you can email at salons@wingspace.com.